What's up? Are we done? Yeah, we are. I'm gonna share my screen so I can just make it. Thank you all for can't see the YouTube stream, but I'm picturing like dozens of viewers. Oh no, actually reality check, I see it. There's not a lot of people yet. But anyways, thank you all for joining. This is Public Assembly broadcast session number 3. We are live with a presentation of Assembly Press, which is a project that, oh no, Max, you gotta go, wait. Yeah, anyways, I'll text you. But we're gonna do a presentation of Assembly Press, which is a protocol that, yeah, nice, sick. I'll add you to the screen. It's good.
Yo. You sound a little underwater on my end.
Really?
Oh no, that was good. That sounded better. Yeah. Maybe it was just the angle real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that the audio from the Fig Jam doesn't really work well if you're doing a live stream, but like we tried that last time with Val.
Right.
Yeah, let me just see the comments.
Yeah, for some reason when you like just now, like there's some, I don't know if it's like the angle of where your mouth is, but sometimes you sound like I can't hear anything you're saying, but then other times it's super clear.
Yeah.
That's really
switch up from, yeah. So I'm gonna switch from my AirPods to like my headphones just in case.
Oh, word. Cool.
Yeah.
Coolio.
Is that John? I don't know. He's like GDR.
Yeah.
Yo, okay.
Yo.
Because I just tweeted at one point I just tweeted the link for the Fig Jam, and there was someone just like browsing in Fig Jam, but I wasn't sure it was. So,
oh, I seen that other person. That was funny.
Yeah.
Yo, can you hear
me? Yeah, I can hear you. It's good. I'm gonna hold on. I'm just switching my headphones. You hear me better now?
Ooh, that's crystal.
Cool. Oh yeah, sick. Okay, Sleeve's joining too. What up?
It's a party.
Sleeve live, by the way.
Yo.
It's like we just caught him, you know, like a deer looking at I don't know what the expression is, but that's how the first image of Sleeve's face was. Anyways, don't want to rescue them. But
yo, that heart balloon, big Banksy vibes back there.
Yeah. Your roommate's room. It's nice.
Oh, nice. Welcome, guys. Sick. This is actually the first time I get like more than one person. Actually, yeah, there's like 4 people, so this is gonna be a sick jam session. I don't know, Joe, if you want to join, but no pressure. You could keep the chat live. That'd be like a cool direction.
Is Joey in it? Oh, is he on the YouTube or something?
Yeah, he commented on the YouTube.
I like that. I like from every angle.
Sick. Yeah, so I'm sharing the Fig Jam right now. Kind of just took like I took out some stuff just because like I think it's better if we just go from a direction of like it's a blank slate and then we just talk about it and then I add information instead of like just throwing everything on a board. But yeah, at one point whenever I feel like there's a term. Oh, okay, yeah, sick. Joey's joining. What up, Joey?
What's up, guys?
What up?
It's crazy.
Full house. It's never happened. I'm happy. Cool. Yeah, so just going back to the Fig Jam board, I added this section here of like glossary, and I feel like whenever there's a term maybe that we need to like clarify, maybe just do like a little pause and be like, yo, Max or Salif, could you explain this a bit better, and add like a new term so it's like better to get more context in the long term. But yeah, I mean, we can get right to it if you guys are into it. Oh, sick. Matthew's in the house. What up, Chaim? Cool. So I pretty much split up the kind of presentation in 3 sections, riffing on how the GitHub is set up, where there's like the protocol section, the back end, and then the front end. Don't mind these questions, like problem we're trying to solve. This was just kind of like a placeholder text. But I think we could like go by section to section and kind of get more of like what the core detail and insight is like on what each component works as. And Max, let me know as well if you feel like there's like a diagram that you shared before that explains more one section than the other, you know. But yeah.
I have an initial proposal, which is to add one more of these sections above protocol, and it can kind of be the framework level description. And then once we kind of lay out that, I think it then makes sense that we can get into the details of the specific things. And like, I'm curious what you are thinking in terms of how deep we get into these. I actually think it could be really interesting to get like very deep into some of the protocol stuff, because that stuff I'd love for someone who eventually watches a recording of this that like have a thought on, or y'all yourselves right now. But yeah.
I mean,
what do you envision for that?
I think so too. Like I think this is like I'm thinking like we have the town halls, which we have like a presentation of like different stuff that are happening in public assembly, and this gives us the opportunity to go like really deep in assembly press and like actually start a conversation. Sorry, I'm just trying to change this out. But so by framework, do you think this graph works for
this is a separate thing. It's also a cool thing that we can go into, but not what I had in mind for the framework.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna choose a different color. Clean slate. But yeah, I mean, if you want to take the lead with talking, and I could at the side just kind of like write down whatever like notes we're talking about when it comes to framework. And I want this to be more of like a conversation, like roundtable vibe. So like, yeah, Salif, Joey, John, if you guys have like something to say, just like hop in, you know. Word. So yeah, framework.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess like the reason I even suggested throwing this framework slide in here is because this is actually this is like the first time like we're really I know like in the forum I've been talking about it a little bit, but this is the first time kind of more sort of like formally explaining like what the concept of assembly press has morphed into. For those who don't have the context, or just to do a quick review, it started very long ago as actually there is a slide in that diagram Figma, Kiru, where we sort of describe the progression. You know, that one Figma we were in before, not this. You know, that other one that had it was the one that had all the diagrams that are outdated, but it had a slide of copy that was actually maybe good for
look for that while you talk. Yeah, I could look for that.
Okay, but yeah, you'll see. It's one where it describes like a V0, V1, V2, V3, V4. But so yeah, as context, we've been working on stuff related to this for almost a year now. Actually, the first version of like sort of what we did was a very rough protocol for curating other addresses on Ethereum, which we built for present material. I think Matthew's on the call, so what's up? Yeah, you can see that up here. That was really interesting because it sort of just was like, that was the first time I was ever writing Solidity. And it was also interesting because present material, this was like a year ago, but it actually, that kind of framework of like curating other, or just like, you know, organizing information that already exists, not necessarily creating like new information, proved valuable in terms of setting the baseline for like a curation thing we wanted to go after. So like the initial version of stuff was sort of very specific use case protocol that was built for present material, then morphed into Neosound. During that process, we realized that the concept of curating things wasn't specific to present material. It was actually something that we should probably generalize so other people could also sort of like leverage the fact of, using curation to do interesting things. And then from there, we realized that even storing even just storing information is actually kind of what we wanted to get to the general level. So like, yeah, maybe present material or Neosound is like storing these kind of like curation blob ID things that are helpful. But maybe someone else has like an app profile they want to store, and that uses like a different blob structure. And that's kind of what V3 and V4 got into. I'd say more that's like what V3 got into, where we realized we were going to want to be able to like, someone who's using this at that point was still just a protocol, could basically choose the data structure that was important for their app or for their database, and then like write a custom implementation for that. And that was iterated on and like is now kind of what the protocol looks like. I can get into this concept of like database contracts, which is sort of like the end state of that. But the other thing that happened with V4 is we realized that we needed to be providing a generic sort of out of the box backend and front end to go along with the protocol, or else the protocol is just honestly not that helpful because it's just, it's accomplishing getting data onto Ethereum, but if you don't have sort of like front end components and hooks for like accessing that data, or a backend that is able to sort of like surface that information in a more performant way, then you can't really make websites or applications that actually might be interesting for like, at a like whatever, at a consumer level, or even just for like a group level. Like if it takes 15 seconds to load something, that's like not really helpful. So yeah, that's kind of when I say framework, I say the kind of evolution from a very specific use case like protocol towards a generalized framework for running on-chain applications that includes a now generalized protocol, as well as kind of these newer front end and back end bits, which we can get into later. But yeah, that is at a high level what the framework concept means. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add.
Maybe like a question that I have is if you could explain a bit more between V3 and V4. I think that's for me like the thing, maybe the section that I don't understand as much. Like, well, maybe a question I'll throw back at you is like, could you name like a specific like roadblock or kind of issue that you ran into between V3 and V4 that made you kind of like step back and be like, okay, like we have to make this more general, like on the protocol level?
Yeah, there's actually one specific thing that happened, which is I learned about Mud, which is for those who don't know, is a really cool on-chain game engine, like kind of substrate protocol framework thing that is being developed that basically provides like a way more crazy version of what we're describing here with Assembly Press for creating like on-chain worlds and stuff like that. And the big thing there that they did that was really cool to see is they just like basically wrote a generic storage function that basically lets you sort of define a schema of data, and then like you're able to store and decode data in a generalized way, so you don't always have to be like redoing that for app to app. In V3, you were basically writing kind of these custom logic things that could only interpret one type of data. So like if you needed to, if you wanted to not do a curation thing and instead some app profile thing, that was going to require a custom logic file built out just for that exact use case. And basically the goal from V3 to V4 was to make it easier for people to use the framework, which basically just means provide as much of the base functionality, which we identified as being important, which is like generalized storage of data on Ethereum. That is when I saw the Mud thing, and they have a really fire way of doing that. We have like a very baby version of doing that is like less efficient, less everything, but it works, and that's cool. And there's lots to learn from like the way Mud has been doing that. But yeah, I'd say that is one of the main things. And then the other big thing that changed is the concept of these database contracts, which I'm still fully getting my head around what they actually mean. But basically, it's cool. Maybe you could go down. There's like that one of the images you hid at the bottom. It's the long one. The graphics you pasted in. Yeah. This is like beginning to get into what the database is really doing. But basically the database contract is a single point like entry contract that lets people interact, and like basically it lets people create rows, like, you know, like an Excel row or like a normal database row. That row is actually your ERC 721, but that's like fully abstracted in the end of it, where basically you're going to just be interacting with this database, creating rows, you know, storing data in cells, but all of those actions that you're doing are in the end of the state. They're either printing out kind of storage receipts that go to like the person who's storing that data, or they're overwriting data that's already kind of associated with the token. You're maybe creating new rows, but when you put everything into one database that like lives behind one database contract, you get the ability to interact with every cell and every row of the database at once, which is really cool because it just makes the UX for doing sort of interactions a lot better. You can also put really nice gas abstraction on the database, which is stuff me, Salif, Nish, and KD worked on at the ETH Paris, the ETH Global event in Paris recently, which also plays really nicely with this database concept because we can basically do programmatic gas subsidization of certain transactions on the database depending on who's sending them. And so that's really interesting as well. So yeah, those are the biggest difference from, to not just go like totally overboard, the biggest difference from V3 to V4 was making it so that the storage of data was generalized, and then also introducing the concept of database contract.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a pause. So Matthew in the chat is like, what is well, like just maybe to explain what database contracts is. Wanted to like rewind and like that's like maybe one of the parts where we could just go in the glossary and simplify that a bit. So how would you define that in like very layman terms?
So basically, I would say it like you can actually think of it as like an Excel table where each new row is a new ERC 721 or 1155 contract, and then each cell in that row is like a token.
Okay, maybe I'll do like a visualization thing after 721 and
or 1155, yeah.
Cell
represents a token.
Represents a token. Cool. I'll clean this up afterwards, but yeah, this is and you guys, if you guys in the chat have more questions like that, like feel free to interrupt or pop me, you know. Cool. Thanks for that.
And there's some more UX things that this gets into. I can get into like what this actually means from like building applications and stuff that I think are cool. But yeah, at the simplest level, it's just getting to the point, like the reason you still want to use ERC 721, or like the reason we even that tokens are still involved in the first place, and it's not just a tokenless kind of database thing, is because getting tokens as like storage receipts are really helpful for kind of UX things, where now you can index all the storage receipts that are being created or, you know, being like given to a specific person. You can and those receipts, I mean, that's what NFT is. So like you could create a new token that represents a song, and then you can be like updating the metadata that's stored with that token. The token itself doesn't need to store any data. It's just pointing to a specific cell in the database. And the UX, in terms of interacting with this data, it all happens through this one database contract, and it makes the process of doing that a lot easier when you put this is where the stuff with the backend comes into play, when you have everything living in one contract, because it makes the process of building applications and custom indexing stuff like way easier.
Yeah, and talking about indexing, I don't know if this is like me asking us too early, but I think it was you, Salif, that was talking about creating like some type of like custom indexer. Was that you? Or I just remember looking at the GitHub repo and seeing something that got updated recently.
Yeah, well, so we learned that initially, in order to kind of like complete this backend chunk of assembly press, we were going to have to develop a custom indexer. And that's gone through quite a few iterations, kind of like learning exactly what we'll need, and kind of also trying to create like a friendly approach such that anyone who wants to use the assembly press framework will be able to like spin something that's like cost effective and easy to set up pretty easily. So yeah, I mean, we can talk specifically about the indexer. Currently,
Later on.
You want to talk about later or no?
I mean, does it fit, I guess, Max? With like, do you think we have to cover anything else before? But it's up to you guys. I think you guys have a better flow of like.
Yo, I
No.
feel like what's still missing is like I hear database contracts and I could like not be more bored ever. You know, like I feel like really understanding why this even matters, or like even like the experience from like a user, right? Like what's gonna be different, if anything, like with my interactions and maybe the way I interact with apps currently, would be like an interesting perspective.
Okay. Do you think,
Yeah,
Max?
I could talk more at the protocol level about this. So maybe go back to that database diagram, because I think there is some interesting stuff. So basically, with the new way the database stuff is structured, the one that had like the black background and all that.
Yeah, this one.
So basically, when you're we can actually go into, we could maybe even look at some of the text, but basically when you are interacting with your ERC 721 1155, you aren't actually interacting with that contract itself. Every transaction happens through the database, and the database manages like kind of the updating of state and like minting of tokens, like after you sort of trigger an event. But it's interesting because like for most people, when you consider like, okay, I want to mint an NFT, that's you like finding that NFT contract and like pressing mint on it, and like it creates a token and it sends it to you or whoever. In this structure, actually only the database is allowed to talk to those contracts. So you couldn't even call mint or store on your own contract directly. Everything has to go through this database. And then the thing that's interesting is the database is fully customizable in terms of all the permissions and everything. So for example, let's say we can go into, can you zoom in a little bit on this user A thing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and also, yeah, if you can give an example, kind of like, just, it doesn't have to be like an existing project, but like figuratively, like if it was like a song NFT or whatever, like use that kind of like framing, that would help too.
Yeah, I'm going to use present material as the best example of this. So I want to create a new row in the database. What that means is I need a new ERC 721 contract. That is where I'm going to store my information. The row I want to create is something that facilitates the storage of curation listings, kind of just like how present material works. And so I'm going to call this, the function is still, the name is still in the work in progress. It's called setup AP 721. But basically I would call this function called setup AP 721. I would tell it who the initial owner is. That's like who's the initial row owner, who can set all the settings. I would tell it the initial settings I want it to set up with the row. That would be things like logic files that control access to the row. It would be things like a renderer file that knows how to decode the specific type of data I'm going to end up storing in that row. And then I create that row. And that's where you see this kind of blank row at the top of this diagram. Nothing's been stored in it. But if you go to the right on this picture, you can see database creates a new press contract. That's kind of like a 721 that corresponds to a row in the database and initializes it with all the starting logic, renderer settings, and transfers it to the owner. So you call setup AP 721, it creates a new row, which is like a contract, and it sends, and like it says that you're the owner or whoever you put in as the initial owner.
Right.
So that could be like, again, there's a contract that lives in the base of present material. It's like a curation contract. So like you could basically create a new row that sets up that specific contract to have these things that make it a curation contract. Like it knows what types of data to store, and you could set up how you want to guard access to it, which is maybe like a separate access token that you like airdrop or like let people mint to people you want to have access on it. And now all of a sudden you kind of have this like row in the database that people can like add data to if they want to. In the case of present material, it would be listings that are relevant on any chain that people with access to present material have the ability to like store new data on. So that's like an example. So if you go to the back to the left now that you have your row, you want to get to the next point, which is like, I want to store data in an existing row in the curation database, for example. So you would tell the database, hey, you remember that row we just created, the present material like row? I want to add a new listing. I want to curate a new piece, and it's on Optimism, or it's on Zora, or it's on mainnet, and the token ID of that piece is 7, and the contract address of that like media contract is like whatever, and okay, word, I want to store it. So I put that in, and when you press store, it basically saves that data in like a new slot in that row, and then it mints a new token, and it sends it to the person who sent that transaction. So at the end of that process, they get the same type of, it's the same way present material works right now, where people get minted curation receipts, basically, which is like proof that you listed a thing at some point, and it contains the information of what you listed, which is really helpful for doing front-end aggregation of what is actually supposed to be on the platform. And now there's your thing. So that's like, you can, as part of this, you can like set up if tokens are transferable or not. So like stuff like profiles, maybe you don't want transferable, or like curation receipts that you're trying to like prove who put a piece of data there, they're not transferable. Other times, maybe they're kind of more generic things, like you're just storing an IPFS string and it's fine for them to be transferable. But yeah, so the database mints a new token that points to the corresponding row and slot in the database, and it sends the storage receipt to the user who sent the transaction to store the data in the first place. So that's kind of the lifespan. You create, it's kind of like a way of setting up decentralized rows, basically, that you're controlling access to. And then the interesting thing, so none of that, basically all of this is a generic approach that you can sort of like tailor to your specific need. So like when you want, if you go to the GitHub, the base architecture is not curation specific. You actually have to like inherit a contract and make it curation specific by adding in these custom like validation functions. It also has no fees in the generic structure, but if you want to add fees, because let's say you're building a product that's charging people for storage of data, you can like implement a fee model that says, you know, it's cost X cents to store a piece of data. You could even have a whole thing about, you know, now this is the model, like at a per storage basis, this is how much it costs to store something on top of gas. If you pay this much, well, you know, we can make the fees go like this. So all of this, the reason that's not in the base of things is because it seems like that's where people are going to want flexibility to like, you know, create their own schemes for data storage, create their own fee models, create their own, et cetera. But the key thing is the decentralized, or sorry, I don't know why I said the word decentralized, is the generalized approach to storing data at a token level and decoding data at a token level, with tokens as receipts that are really helpful for kind of like assigning reputation and UX things. And the one last bit that is the nice transition into the database is when you have all of this happening in the database contract. So basically every function, all data that's being stored, all proof that someone did anything, all new rows, they all live at the database level at this one contract. So from a building an indexer standpoint, all you have to do is build an indexer that knows how to like decode all the events that are getting emitted from this one database. And you can create basically a perfect one-to-one state of a replica database in like something like Postgres or whatever that you then use as your performant backend to build an application around. So because it's generalized and because they all follow the same structure, people can kind of take advantage of this backend approach like out of the box without needing to like figure out how to build their own indexer, which is what we realized we needed to do, because that's just, you can't make basically performant apps without having a backend, and none of us have written backend code before. So we turned to ChatGPT and John, and we wrote a backend.
Sick. Well, I'm going to segue to Salif and John if you guys want to like now talk about the indexer. Is it Dreamweaver? Like that's like what's in the GitHub
working title. Yeah.
Working title. Okay.
But I'm actually just going to let John take the helm because he's been working the most on the indexer.
And you can give like a brief summary. You don't have to go like super deep if you want to, because I know you're still working on it. But
yeah. Well, like a lot of this was like built off of like the work that Salif had done already. Salif, was there a reason why you chose Bundler, or you know, like? because that's really where like I picked it up.
Well, I think it was because Max kept saying that it's so important to have this data be permanently stored. So that's kind of where we started obsessing over that idea. But yeah, I guess that idea, correct me if I'm wrong, spurred from this kind of concept of wanting to be able to kind of reconstruct the database, like everything that has occurred in the context of a database, like without having to parse through like all the event logs. So yeah, if we have these like permanent like snapshots of like the state of the database at any given time, like hosted on Arweave, we can kind of like provide an easier way for people to reconstruct like what has occurred in the context of this app / database like over time.
Yeah, I can add one little bit of just like what Sleep was getting at is sort of like what's the motivations for like having a backend, and I think it's related to the thing I was describing with about the framework at the beginning, which is like if there's a community governed database, but only a few people know how to index the data, then it's really not actually providing like basically it's just like while you might still be able to like use it for certain things, that data is still kind of like hidden away or inaccessible to a lot of people. So like you kind of need to provide something that like gets you to the end like quicker, gets you to the end of actually being able to access the data, or else this like, you know, potentially really cool like database structure that, you know, multiple people are using is still not all the way there. So that was the what we're still working on with the Dreamweaver thing, or whatever the backend ends up being called, is sort of just like the simplest, lightest way to go from like we have these database contracts and we want to make all the data accessible for people to use.
Just to add on one more thing, like if you created like a novel database and like attached like a fee model to it or something, and you were trying to like encourage app developers to build on top of it, it would make a lot of sense for you to provide like a backend solution that makes it easy for like client consumers to bring in that data. And the small nuance I just wanted to get at is the fact that theoretically you could be providing a database that is used by multiple apps, not just one app.
Sick.
Maybe the easiest way to go through this is if I just kind of maybe go through the front end, like make some events happen, and then I run the indexer, and then we send that information to a bundler, and then check out check out our database to see how that information got populated. All right, let me see if I can present.
Yeah,
okay. If you wanna like take a stab. Do you know how to present? Hold up.
Yeah, just click present and
yeah
there you
go for it.
Can y'all see?
Not
yet, but let me see if I have to stop presenting. Okay, I'll stop sharing. Try it now.
Y'all can see?
Yes.
Right. So here we are at the front end. My wallet's connected. I'll disconnect.
Wait, want to tell them what's up with the front end real quick too, John?
Yeah. Get that off.
But this is just a really basic way to trigger some of the core functions on the database. It's not all of them. It's just a few of them to serve the use case of showing how the backend works.
So this right here is just the Optimism Etherscan, right? So we're gonna just trigger a couple events. Trigger the most expensive one first, and maybe just a couple more. Maybe a stored one. And so we go to Etherscan. We see that we ran. Actually, let's see. It takes a while. So we had like a event maybe 9 hours ago at this block, right? Now we have 10,000 blocks later. We have a new one, right? So we want to continuously be capturing these events. So what we could do is eventually what this is going to be doing is going to be running like automatically, and we just trigger this kind of script right now you see the current block number, it's going through each block in like chunks of 10,000 and getting all these events that have happened in between. And right now it's upserting. It's trying to upsert like events that we've already gone through. But yeah, so it chunks things together into 10,000 blocks, gets all the events that happened, and then it pushes it to our database. But first, it gives us let me see. Why is this?
You have to uncomment that thing that got commented out. Is it still going to Arweave or not?
Yeah, it should be going to Arweave. It's getting sent to here.
Maybe like a very basic question while that happens. So yesterday I was trying to like test it out, but it's like, so this is all on optimism.
Yeah.
Like, so because I was trying to get like testnet like Goerli, and I couldn't for some reason because like so I know that like eventually I found out that like it's on like the paradigm faucet, but like why is this like on like maybe the decision of like going on optimism, like you guys could talk about that a bit. I know it's like pretty obvious, but
yeah, I mean, we have initial thoughts about like deploying the framework somewhere on the OP stack, so we just wanted to test it out on Optimism Goerli.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think maybe there's actually one important thing to understand with this framework. Another thing that is sort of a progression is from like thinking of the sort of whole assembly press thing at the beginning is like kind of initially there was thoughts that like there would be one specific deployment of like a specific type of protocol like on one chain, and that's like where assembly press lives. But kind of what's happened is as this has become like a general purpose sort of just like information system, what it means is that people will be deploying their own instances of like an assembly press framework customized to whatever they're doing on whatever chain they want. So like you might put it on Ethereum mainnet, you might put it on Polygon, you might put it on Optimism. It's wherever like your app wants to be. That's like where you put it. Maybe it's on multiple like chains, maybe it's not, but that's also kind of another it's actually a thing that public assembly needs to sort of like come around to, because I know like we had a lot of thoughts of sort of we were going to be governing like a canonical instance of a specific protocol, which I mean we very may well still be doing that. But there's also what I feel like is a sort of broader mission, which is kind of just like proliferating and like making the whole framework more accessible and usable for people. That is actually outside of the realm of like governing a specific protocol, and it's actually just working towards the development of a framework and making that framework as usable and like adopted by as many people as possible. So yeah, the whole like it's on Optimism Goerli thing is we needed to put it on a testnet somewhere. So that's the one we put it.
Cool. Just asking. Dope.
John, do you want to show like the Postgres stuff to like?
Yeah. For sure. So here we have a list of like all the events that have happened since we last ran it, right? And so what's cool is that now it gets the latest block or the last event, and it just restarts the script. So you can imagine that like we'll be continuously picking up new events without having to go through all the data. And so, okay, now we got it at Bundler. We use Prisma to send it to our Postgres database. And like here we have like all these different events. These aren't the final tables. They're going to be fixed a little bit. But you see now we have all this information that Max was talking about, right? And it's like able to be reconstructed by anybody, and just based on the events of the contract. But I think that like these tables, it's consequential, right? Like this isn't really the endpoint, and I think like this is probably where like the exciting stuff starts happening with like how you can manipulate this data and like use it on like your front end of your applications.
It also kind of just allows your apps to be more performant. Like if you follow like a NFT, whatever, full stack tutorial or something, like the way that they'll have you, okay, I'm speaking very broadly, but like typically you'll like be like pinging like RPC nodes to like get data directly like from the chain, which is like expensive and slow. But in this kind of like whole structure, you're kind of having a process like that go on in the background, and then you're kind of doing a more like classic Web 2 technique, maybe to use that term, and just like talking to this like database, no like RPC nodes necessary, and then you can just use like a simple API to like pull in data to your website. It's just a lot faster and more performant.
And yeah, John, could you actually go, or could you screen share again and just go back to that setup AP721 table? Because there's like an interesting thing we can do, which is just sort of explaining why sort of tracking all this data really tightly in that database is helpful for like, what does it look like at the very end when you're like clicking a button like on the site that is using this framework? Like, why is it helpful to have all this stuff?
Yeah. Can y'all see?
I can't see now.
Might have to stop sharing. Yeah. Can y'all see now? There we go.
Yeah, nice. So like, imagine that, and can you scroll to the left just so we can see the press? We'll go, yeah. So imagine like that row, number 3, AP721, OXD54. Like, we want to go see that. That's representing a channel in this example we're continuing to use. It's the same present material channel. We're on the page of the app that is like showcasing that channel, and I want to add something new to it. So I'm going to be adding it as like a specific sender. So maybe it's that OX806 thing. And so when I click this button that says like add listing or like, you know, curate a new thing, instead of like hitting some read call direct to RPC, like Salif was talking about, to like do these access checks and whatever, we can actually ping immediately to like an API that's kind of set up around this, which is like, okay, this address 806 is trying to call store on this row, which is classified as D54. Let's move to the right. Let's look at what logic. Can you move to the right on this? Yeah. We know that that row is using this specific logic implementation. We know that this specific logic implementation says that for people like this address, it means that they either get a no vote or a yes vote for they're allowed to store data. And then we also have additional things that are like they have to either pay or not pay to actually transmit that storage. But all of those things happen as like one little quick ping to the database. So like I press a button on this site, it pings the database, it knows who I am, it goes to the logic file, it knows the state of the logic file in terms of, you know, what the access control is, and then it shoots back directly into the UI. It will either block your transaction because it's like you don't have access, or it will process that and it will pass all of the requisite data into the function call along with any necessary like message like ETH alongside it, depending, like maybe you're minting like a copy of somebody's work, but like on 1155. And all of this happens like immediately because you basically already know the answer to everything in this database. So you don't have to be doing any on the fly calculations or lookups or stuff. So it just makes the ability to do sort of like these performant kind of still complex access control mechanisms, but it makes you do just a lot faster and like more accuracy and stuff. And then in a similar way, from like let's say you want to have a site that's like loading all, you know, it's like a site that show maybe that same channel page, right? And you want to be showcasing all of like the media that's there. If you go onto present material right now, you see code that I wrote like 8 months ago, and it's kind of not the best. And it means sometimes the images aren't like perfectly cached and like aren't like really performant. And so like it will take some time to go in. But there's an event called data stored that basically is how you actually store a specific, you know, IPFS link that like points to a song or something like that. When you're watching this database, anytime a new data, and this is what John was just going through with the sort of like Dreamweaver scripts and stuff, anytime a new data storage event occurs, you can just immediately go grab the data that was stored, go like fetch the actual contents of that data, because maybe it's on IPFS, and now you can just cache it immediately in a database or like some type, whatever your like caching mechanism is. And then when it's time to actually pull in all of the data onto your front end, it's not like you have to go like, okay, what's the token URI? Let's go find the IPFS thing. Okay, now we have to go fetch this whole crazy IPFS thing. Maybe it's an hour-long video. That takes a long time, and the user is experiencing all of that. Instead, they can just say, what data is associated with row X, token number Y, and pull it in right now. And we actually already have it. and maybe you want to overwrite the data because like you're updating the metadata to a new version, and you have that data overwritten event triggers. So like again, you can keep things cached. You can see version history. You can see who's been submitting these transactions and who's been updating the versions, et cetera, et cetera. And like that, at like kind of that concept of just having what Salif was describing of like the up-to-date sort of like perfect state of the on-chain database replicated in a more traditional backend is what gives you the benefits of both worlds of still being able to manage all of the data on chain, but then having the performance of like a traditional backend to use for your application. And that's kind of where, along with some like front end stuff, that's kind of like the hooks for like really nice interactions or like knowing how to interact with the database. That's kind of like the framework as a whole. And the concept of doing that for any type of application is the same. You need to build a backend, you need to have protocol, and you need to have front end ways. And so Assembly Press is hoping to be a generic framework for doing any application like that.
Sick. I think like, because I'm going to reshare my screen. We're going close on time. I'm going to go back to the FigJam, and I think a cool next step would be to go in each section, like protocol, backend, front end, and kind of give, I know you just did it, but like a very brief TLDR of like where you're at and like what's needed. So for whoever, like if there's devs or anyone that's watching this, they could be like a quick glimpse into like what are the next steps, if you're cool with it. Do you think that's, or was there anything else? I know we didn't really go to the graphs that we were like talking about, but I don't know if you want to talk about this one.
Yeah, I feel like that could be an interesting thing to end with, because I think it's is like maybe an underlying like motivation to have this stuff figured out. But yeah, I feel like from the protocol level, I would ask if you'd be interested in deleting some of this, because a lot of this, it's not all of this is there. The initial ERC 721 architecture has been drafted. So that's nice. So that's been drafted, and it's the thing that's kind of underpinning that demo. 1155 is not in progress yet. The reason it says in progress here is because the earlier version was in progress, and then kind of there was more rewriting and stuff. Same thing with curation, same thing with archiving, but those are coming like very soon. The stuff that, so those are the existing deploys. The stuff that comes next is filling out 1155 and some of these like specific strategies. Curation is kind of the first strategy we're working on for 721. That's something that knows how to like deal with these like curation structs that I've been describing. And then an archive system is what we're kind of setting up for 1155, which is basically just really simple, storing strings to, IPFS pointers or RWeave pointers, whatever you want to use for storage. And I'd say the biggest thing we're looking for feedback on is the entire structure itself. Kind of needs to go through an audit. Makes sense. It's hard to just ask for that, because that's like, it's not a necessarily small thing. There's a few issues. There's a few issues up on the GitHub right now that are kind of a bit more specific, but basically, I guess what we're trying to solve, or the gist of things, is just a generalized framework, a generalized database structure for storing and rendering information and controlling access to who's allowed to do that.
Okay. Well, I added a link to the full audit, like the exact link for the issue that was open in the GitHub. I mean, we'll leave it like that for now, but I think it's something that like maybe if we do get like extra funding or whatever, we could actually like get someone to audit it. Cool. So I'll leave that for the protocol level. Salif, John, if you guys want to add something.
For the protocol, or just?
For the protocol.
Oh no.
No, you good? Okay, cool. For the back end, what would you say?
Yeah. So right now, the concept is there. It's working. There's a couple of things that we can do to clean it up. We need to shape the tables a bit more correctly. We're gonna have like 3 main tables. One for the AP721 information, one for the data information, and one at the token level. The data is the token stuff, and then like our raw transaction stuff that doesn't like really differentiate between events. That's pretty close. And then I think we're going to be replacing a part of it just to rely on something called Ponder.
Okay. So if, just to reiterate, sorry, because I'm writing this down as, I'm going to leave them on the board. So you said the AP721?
Oh yeah, 3 tables. Yeah. It's going to be 3 Postgres tables. One is like a raw transaction data, which is just basically it contains like event information, like all the events that happened. It's not really differentiated or anything. It doesn't really have any like fully useful information except that it points to like the Arweave ID that backs it up.
Okay.
Which that is useful. The other one is AP721 table that has all the information that Max was talking about. And then the other one is like a token level, like data information. It's like, like minted tokens, burned tokens, updated tokens, things like that.
Cool. I'm gonna like listen back to this and like rewrite it, but I'll leave this as is for now.
Yeah.
If I link, should I link the GitHub repo to
Maybe
is there any-
both. We're supposed to port over the Dreamweaver stuff into the assembly press backend, but I don't know what stage it's going to be at. So potentially,
okay, cool.
Because
All right.
I guess we'll either deprecate Dreamweaver and add a link to the assembly press backend, maybe.
Okay. Well, I'll probably come back to this when that's.
I think there's a link to add, Kiru, which is this thing John just mentioned called Ponder is actually about to be like an enormous thing that like makes this whole backend like way more performant and like suitable. So it could be cool that's a really awesome open source repo as well that there's like this one crazy dev working on. So that could be, if you go to Ponder SH just online, like ponder.sh, that's kind of where Ponder lives right now. It also has a GitHub repository, but that's the next thing. And it's actually exciting because that's like an open source repo that's been looking for new contributors. So there's definitely potential for some merging of minds on the framework and Ponder.
I'll add it here.
Nice.
I've thought a lot about indexing information on Ethereum.
Cool.
Yeah.
Dope. And then that's it for backend.
Gotta check the notes real quick.
Yeah.
Some other stuff.
I mean, it's also stuff that like we could add later on. I'm just like,
I think the table information, like making that as like useful as possible, robust as possible, is probably the bulk of the work that's left. Actually, yeah, there's a little bit around like using VM to like decode some of the topics and just make them more human readable. Okay. That needs to be done. That's like fairly easy implementation. But I'd say those are the main 3 things: the decode topics, porting over to Ponder, and shaping the tables is the bulk of the work. But by the end, we should have something that's like really dope.
Okay, sick, cool. So leave that there, and then last but not least, front end. Yeah, what is this, by the way? I always like I keep seeing in the GitHub repo and then like in the Figma decks, but what is this image?
I think that is the art that we use for KSON and the
okay.
And also Assemble package, which reared its head recently. Yeah, cool. So with the front end stuff, actually I haven't even read that much of the code, but basically what it will be is like a SDK that lives on NPM that should be pretty extensible for like any type of database implementation, at least as like as the ground level. You'll be able to, like NPM install the assembly press hooks and get something that works out of the box for communicating to your database via like a React app. So what needs to happen is we have to actually publish the package and also make sure that it's like hooked up to be, you like slot in your contract address. And yeah, I think that's the main thing that needs to go on in there.
And is there anything here that could be like, let's say someone that doesn't need that much context and like assembly press in general could just kind of like slide in and like contribute? That's also why I'm trying to reiterate on these questions to see if like there is any way of like adding people to this. Just me like assuming that the front end might be like the easiest entry into like working on this, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't we haven't outlined any issues as far as the front end stuff goes, but yeah.
All good if you don't. Like, I'm just like,
there could very well be stuff.
Okay, cool. So I'll keep a note to remember
I think
that.
the one thing I would say also, which is like a wrapper for all of these things, is some form of documentation. Because we're essentially, it's necessary for us to provide like a way to kind of get all these individual pieces in place, which means like configuring your backend like on a server, on some type of hosted service, and then like installing the npm package in your React app, and then like deploying a database with whatever the fuck you want to use. So we need to provide ways for people to understand how to do that at a very basic level, and then also go in and kind of like, how do you augment each of those three things to your specific needs? And I don't know, like if I think what we've been talking about more generally is like in separate pursuits on building on top of Assembly Press, we'll be able to provide kind of like an example of that. I feel like maybe it's a little bit idealistic to say that specific documentation will exist anytime soon about augmenting things, but maybe like places to look and kind of like a general things to think about when designing your own database.
Cool. Let me just, sorry, I'm going to add one more. I'm just going to add the link to the GitHub repo.
I would add on to what Salif was saying too, which, and I guess it's also sort of in response to where can people like jump in right now. I personally still feel, and this is where I feel like a little bit of like self pressure to kind of help this get moved along, is I still think the fact that like a full end to end like example of this isn't working makes it a lot harder for someone to like jump in right now. But if someone wanted to get tapped in the meantime, I would just say like go through the code base. Like if you know Solidity, go through the protocol example and go through the tests. I think it explains pretty well like what is trying to be achieved. And as kind of the sort of full end-to-end demo gets hooked together, there will be a much better explanation of like why we're even doing all of this. And I think at that point, being able to say like what's wrong, what's missing in the protocol, how can we make the back end better, what would be great to have as front end, and like what documentation would be great to like tie everything together. I think that will become illuminated. I still think it's a little bit early. Just because it's just a lot of context people would need to get to be able to do like a very specific thing before it's tied together. But as soon as that is kind of done, which I mean, like hopefully any day now, I think hopefully this conversation we just had serves as a great sort of intro. And then now
that's what I was going to say. It could be like we're talking about town halls, having more like dev open call kind of sessions. Like I feel like this session right here could be a good like starter pack for like if you want to hop in, start by watching this and then like attend the calls later on, and you could like get more context there. But okay, that's cool.
I think that's exciting. Is part of the other reason why a lot of this hasn't been surfaced over the past like 2-3 months is because it's been very much in flux. Like we only realized we needed a back-end approach kind of recently. The protocol is getting rewritten and re-architected multiple times over the past year, but again, over the past few months. And so have been trying to get it to a place of relative stability. It's not going to be stable anytime soon, but like relative stability before, like kind of ringing that alarm that like, hey, this is ready for people to jump into, because we don't want to kind of like activate people too early and then it's not really ready and then lose kind of all the interest in like potential people who could work on it before it's like kind of really set up for that. Because even that means having the GitHub set up correctly and like having a recurring place to like, have discussion about the framework and like what's going on. And so there's even once the demo is ready and once even like a roadmap is put together, that's still almost not even enough to start really getting people in. We need to sort of have that structure set up, but I think we're getting closer there though. And that the demo being wrapped and like some of this stuff becoming stable sets the stage for us to be able to put those remaining pieces together and then like, flash the bat symbol or whatever, and it's like, all right,
Yeah.
people start working on assembly press.
Let's go. Sick. Maybe to close off, we could talk about this graph right here.
Yeah. Okay. This is actually a graph I wrote, or like a diagram I drew like a minute ago. But it's kind of been at the underpinning of a lot of, I don't know, sort of.
You want to show the original or this one? I don't know. I was trying to like clean it up so that.
I feel like, I mean, that you actually, I don't know how you did that. It looks kind of fire, but I feel like that works relatively. Basically, the concept is just that, like, you know, all the apps that are kind of being built in like this space, you know, like everyone who's doing music stuff or on-chain media or like on-chain curation or like anything, was trying to like just like get down to like what are actually the mechanisms that are happening underneath stuff, like aside from, doesn't matter that it's on chain, doesn't matter how any of these things are happening, like what is actually the sort of like actions that are taking place. And so at the very base level, you have like an identity of some sort. That identity is like a user wallet, maybe it's like a group, maybe it's a multi-sig, it's whatever, maybe it's a non-on-chain thing, you know. That identity is doing a thing. That thing is creating information that it has like a one-to-one connection to. There's not like a server in between it. It's like I am storing new data on Ethereum, for example, and I have the ability to change that information if I want to or not. And so that's like, I know that sounds very simple, but in terms of like really trying to drill down into like what are these actions and behaviors and like mechanisms actually doing, that's kind of like what it's doing. And just the act of creating new information is separate from placing it and distributing it. So that's like kind of where we are thinking of like the curation stuff, where it's like you need to have an identity, then you have the ability to create information, but then you have the ability to place and distribute that information inside different contexts. You can't really place information inside different contexts unless that information exists. So that's why there's kind of that other step. Whether or not the information you're distributing in different contexts is stuff you made yourself is a separate question.
Could you elaborate on context? So like, I know that's maybe the part that I was kind of like, didn't really know how to frame it. So what would you say is an example of context? Do you mean like present material as a context layer?
Exactly. So like, let's say I create a blog post or a song or a video or whatever. That's like information I own, right? It's on that top level. I want to throw it in the present material because that's a cool context, but I also want to throw it into like the PA Open blog because that's another context that feels valuable to me. I don't want to have to create like that. There's one piece of information, but I want it to be in different context. I don't want to have to create. I don't want to have to upload it to YouTube and to Instagram separately, right? I want to be able, in an ideal scenario, I can just make my canonical instance of the information and then put it where I want it to be. So that's kind of like what that layer is showing. And then the bottom layers are showing stuff where like once you have the ability to like create information and put it in context, you can then do really interesting things to like synthesize that information, which actually ends up creating new information on the other side. Synthesize means stuff like aggregating, training AI models, etc., to then creating search opportunities to go through data. All of that are like kind of like different ways of creating new information. But on the other side of that, you're able to get to this final stage, which is the synthesization part. And you can't actually get to synthesization unless you have the stuff that comes before it. So that's what we were trying to figure out when we were like, okay, what's really at the crux of like all these apps and all these different like on-chain experiences people are building. Not to like try and say like this is it or not.
Yeah.
What felt like to us is that people were kind of like sort of like overlooking what was really happening at the bottom and maybe skipping certain steps, even things. I think for me, the thing that's most interesting about this diagram is that no place on this do you see the words like sell your work for money. Like that is a cool thing that is enabled but it's not
like the main use point.
Exactly. It's something you can do, which is great. And that's like what I would say is that's a secondary action similar to like synthesize that you can do like along these things. But a lot of things right now that might be focusing on that as the main behavior, that's where it felt like that's sort of like an oversight. And it took, it maybe requires stepping back and actually like looking at what's going on first. That would be, and I mean, whether or not that's right, I don't know. But that's like something that is interesting to me about this graphic because it shows there's still a lot of value to be had in sort of all this information management outside of just
Yeah.
selling
Yeah.
work.
One of the main thing that came to mind is like, it's kind of like down the line, if you want to like reference something that's been made, like this could be a kind of like mechanism where it's like you package all of these like references to like annotate like the next like new thing that's happening. Or yeah, I don't know. I just really see that it's like in the long term it could be a really good practice to just simplify the whole thing. But yo, cool, man. This is sick. Is Joey still here? No, he left. Damn. And Salif left too. Damn. I'm gonna drop off, but catch you on the forum. Cool. I think this is a good. Yeah, I feel like this really gives like a catch up to everything that like you guys been working on, and it's a good like this is where we're at kind of framing of like the project. Any last words? Any closing thoughts?
People who are interested in potentially helping with the organization, road mapping, contributor management, et cetera, documentation, those are things in the short term that we could use help with. We'll also be working on those things, but in terms of like where people could like actually jump in right now, again, it maybe is like a week too early, but like very shortly it would be great to, I think I've referenced this in the forum. It would be great to get to the point where we're having like recurring core dev calls, sort of like this, where people would be talking about the ongoing development of the protocol, backend, front end solutions, biz dev opportunities for public assembly, or for people who are like, they just heard about it and they want to like, find someone who knows how to work on this framework. They could come there, and that's like a place where they could talk about it. People who are building applications on top of the framework and share like their experience. And basically just that whole management of like an ecosystem around the framework, I think is going to require like people focused on that, or at least, not focused, like people interested in like spending their time helping facilitate all of those conversations. And there's like a decent opportunity, I'd say, for someone to like slot in and do that. Again, we'll all be doing that, but we're also pretty heads down in the core dev of it itself. So sometimes it's nice to have people who are following along and can actually just like facilitate the conversations. So the people who are like more focused on the dev, on that, because it's a lot,
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I dropped the link for the forum in the chat. We also have like monthly town halls that anyone could join if you guys want to. But yeah, hopefully this was like a good kind of like overview of what we've been working on, and yeah, excited to see this move on. This is really cool. On that note, we'll kind of close off. Thank you, John, Max, Salif, Joey. Thank you guys for showing up, and we'll see you guys on the internet.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks
man.
for listening.
Yeah. Cool. Peace out, guys. And broadcast.